There are so many Apple desktops to choose from, and maybe you shouldn't. It's been over a month since Apple released the new Mac Studio, and it made me realize something about my current computing needs. I don't need a desktop anymore, and it feels strange to say that. As someone who mostly was using an iMac to run this channel, it feels alien that even now that the Mac Studio is out and literally sitting on my desk, that most of my work is still being done on Apple's 14-inch MacBook Pro. But why? Why am I so drawn towards Apple's laptops now in the age of Apple Silicon, and what strong consideration should you make before purchasing your next Mac? Starting off, the obvious differentiation between something like the MacBook Pro and a desktop Mac like the Mac Studio is the form factor. The MacBook Pro is portable. It's a laptop. While the Mac Studio is, well, I mean, it's certainly more portable than your average PC desktop, but it doesn't have a screen, a keyboard, or a trackpad attached to it. The MacBook Pro does. It's a complete package with one of the best displays you'll ever lay your eyes on, a great keyboard, and the best trackpad ever made. And out of the box, even without any accessories, you can just start using it with everything built in, while the Mac Studio requires a keyboard, a mouse, and a display. Yeah, I know I just described to you what a laptop is in 2022, in case you didn't know what it was. But listen, this portability really changes the way that I use my computer, because the 14-inch MacBook Pro is pretty small when you consider the power behind it. It's just 3.5 pounds and more compact than bigger laptops like the 16-inch MacBook Pro, but still basically packs in the same power as that 16-inch MacBook Pro with the same exact M1 Max chipset. This portability and power packaged together is great. It's so effortless to throw the MacBook Pro into my bag whenever I'm heading out somewhere. I've literally brought this MacBook Pro with me on so many trips and outings where I didn't even use it because it was just so hassle-free to throw into a bag and forget about it. And if I did need that power, if I did want to get some work done, I was so glad that I had that MacBook Pro alongside me rather than having to go back home or to my studio and then work on a desktop machine. Now again, I just described a laptop. What makes this MacBook Pro different than what I could have done in previous years on other Apple laptops? Well, that's where the magic of Apple Silicon comes in, because never before has Apple been able to make a laptop this portable, packed with this much power. I mean, we're comparing the base model of the Mac Studio with its M1 Max chip, and you can literally get the same amount of power inside of a 14-inch MacBook Pro with the same processor, storage, and memory. Not only can you get the same amount of power blow for blow with the M1 Max Mac Studio, but you can actually utilize all of that power even away from the desk for longer than you would think with the energy efficiency of Apple Silicon. For my normal workflow of editing a video from start to finish, that means that I can pretty much take this laptop off the charger and complete an edit all on battery power. That's usually about 4 to 5 hours of video editing for a simple video, like this one, a very simple video. And I would say on previous MacBook Pros, especially on the smaller 13-inch model, you could drain that battery down using an app like Final Cut Pro in just 2 hours. There's even advantages that go beyond power for me with this MacBook Pro, and that would be, if you can believe it, lower fan noise. Now, I'm not saying that the MacBook Pro has a better thermal system. It is well documented by now that the Mac Studio's thermal system is amazing and honestly goes above and beyond what is necessary to keep that computer cool, and it does that with pretty constant low fan noise that never really ramps up. The MacBook Pro takes a different philosophy. It lets the system get hotter before ramping up the fans. But for most tasks, that means complete silent operation, which is something I appreciate. The fans do ramp up when it gets hot though, so the maximum sound of the MacBook Pro fans is likely to get louder than the Mac Studios, but overall, for most tasks, it's just a really quiet system, whereas the Mac Studio, for some reason, is just always emitting just a little bit of fan noise. Even in other areas where you would expect the MacBook Pro to take a significant hit, like in the port selection, it just isn't as bad anymore with Apple's new Pro laptops. Sure, the Mac Studio has more ports and more variety of ports, but for the ports that I actually use and need, ports like the SD card slot or a few Thunderbolt USB-C ports, Well, the MacBook Pro has all of them. But for me, perhaps the biggest reason why I can now use the MacBook Pro comfortably as my main computer is because Apple has finally released their own first-party display. This was the real catalyst that made me consider to continue to just use my 14-inch MacBook Pro as my main machine. Well, you might be thinking that sounds weird. Why would Apple releasing their own display have anything to do with why you would want to use a laptop as your main computer, especially when there's so many other displays out there? Well, it's just the experience of using this display that just makes using this as both a laptop and as a desktop computer so easy and effortless that it really feels like there's no limits to this device. So when I sit down at my desk, all I have to do is take the single Thunderbolt cable, plug it into one of the ports of my MacBook Pro, and there doesn't feel like there's a major transitional period of switching between laptop mode and desktop mode. Everything is handled by that single cable connection as well, and settings like the default speaker, microphone, and the camera, all of those automatically switch over to the studio display and displays my content in the correct resolution, and the display itself gives me a very close matching display panel with very similar color calibration to that of the MacBook Pro, and hey, it even charges it. And once closed, the MacBook Pro kind of just looks like a flattened out version of the Mac Studio on my desk, and it doesn't occupy a huge footprint. Once in this clamshell mode, the best way I can describe this experience is it just feels like using a desktop. I don't think of it as a laptop connected to an external display, and I think that's one of the best compliments I can give it. With older MacBooks, you would always feel like there was some sort of compromise to using your laptop this way. The system's always felt a little too sluggish connected to a bigger external display, especially a display that's pushing 5K resolution, and especially when you would start to harness the power of your laptop. Like, one of the top comments I used to get in my older MacBook Pro review videos is, was the fan loud when it was connected to an external display? And yeah, especially with the laptop lid closed on those older MacBooks, and when you're using professional applications, it could be a downright unpleasant experience. The fans would just spin up and create a really audible sound to the point where it kind of just felt like you were damaging your laptop by keeping it constantly connected to an external display. With these new Apple Silicon MacBooks, it just doesn't feel like that anymore. The system is quiet, but the power is there. The battery life is amazing, and it doesn't feel like there's a compromise. It's the ultimate hybrid laptop desktop, and the more I use it, the more I love the idea of just having this as my only computer with all of my projects and files stored on it and ready to access at any given time, no matter where I am. And this even translates to the lower end of Apple's products now, not just this expensive MacBook Pro. And while the experience won't be entirely the same, just look at Apple's lower end laptop like the MacBook Air. It ships with the same exact processor as the desktop Macs, the M1 iMac or the M1 Mac Mini. And it's even more of a direct comparison between those models because at least on the Mac Studio, there are specs beyond the M1 Macs where some users can utilize even more power thanks to the M1 Ultra. But in most cases, these laptops now perform almost exactly the same as their desktop counterparts and come with a whole swath of benefits that just aren't possible on a desktop system. Are there advantages to Mac desktops? Yes, I'm not discounting that. Right now, they come with more ports, have better cooling systems, and if you don't need portability, they have better performance per dollar than any of these laptops. But the writing was already on the wall. MacBooks are the most popular Mac computers, and they have been outselling their desktop counterparts even before Apple Silicon came onto the scene. However, for power users like myself, I think there was always a certain notion that we needed the increased power of a Mac desktop, and what I'm realizing is that with this first generation of Apple Silicon, that the major benefits of these efficient chips are more apparent with their laptops. And because these laptops now often perform better than older Intel Mac desktops, it's really becoming apparent that for most people, you don't need a Mac desktop. All right, I am really interested to hear everyone's thoughts on this. What do you think about the current state of the Mac with Apple Silicon? And are you using a Mac laptop in the same way I am, or are you still a Mac desktop person? Really interested to hear this conversation in the comments below, and if you want some of the accessories or plan on buying something like a MacBook Pro or any of the other Macs I mentioned in this video, check out my affiliate links in the description below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.